Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and I'm with Audrey Waters. Hi, Audrey.
Hello.
It's the 27th of August, 2012, and this is the weekly review of Audrey's posts at Hack Education. So, Audrey, a little bit of a slower week, but very interesting still.
Yeah, it's hard to tell if it was a matter of it being sort of the strange sort of calm before the storm of back to school, or if I've been in the middle of moving, and so if it was me not paying close enough attention or writing a lot of posts. So.
Well, it's still great material. So I thought the story on No Red Ink was really interesting. Tell us about what is happening there.
Yeah, this is an interesting startup. So this is a company that was founded by Chicago-based high school English teacher Jeff Shore, and he's doing something that I really like, which is, as a teacher, he identified a problem that he was having as a teacher, but also that his students were having, and built a website to help address that. So he recognized that for a lot of reasons, the students, his students weren't getting enough grammar practice. That he was, as the name suggests, spilling a lot of red ink or spilling a lot of ink on his students' papers, giving them feedback on their writing, but they weren't necessarily getting the grammar practice that they need. So he designed a website that does just that, helps students through various things, punctuation, contractions, commonly misspelled, commonly misused words, I should say. And it allows the students to personalize it with the things that might interest them. So the questions that they get, they can indicate if they're interested in the NBA or particular musicians or movies, and the questions are personal or somewhat personalized around those topics. And then it also identifies the problem areas that students have, and allows them some focused work and some tutorials if they continue to get things wrong.
So what I really liked about this was it's a teacher who sees a need, who creates a solution. The worry for me is that this doesn't feel like a product, it feels more like kind of a project. It's hard for me to see this turning into something revenue-based.
Yeah, I think I have a sort of there are several things that I think could be challenges for Jeff to face. He's right now, the tool is free. He does plan, I think, eventually charging money for it. And I think that transition from a free tool to a paid tool is often a sticky point. And I think whether you're selling the services to teachers or selling it to schools or even convincing parents that they should buy a subscription is still, I think that's always a friction point here. And any time you're building something like this. I think that, this is one of the areas I think that just in general makes building education products tricky. I think that I'm not a huge fan of sort of the kinds of assignments that would have students drill themselves and practice again and again on doing these sorts of assignments. On the other hand, it's fine to say you get better at grammar the more you read and the more you write. I think that's tricky too. So I think that there are definitely some challenges that Jeff has ahead of him, and he is a sole founder. I think he's looking for a technical co-founder right now. But I think balancing being a teacher, being an entrepreneur, and making your way in Silicon Valley is definitely challenging. But I think it's off to a good start, and I know a lot of teachers are trying this out and using it, and he does seem to be getting great feedback from teachers on it.
I really don't want to pour any cold water on this because I feel really appreciative of the fact that he's sort of taken this initiative and done this. But I can think of hundreds of other projects that teachers have just sort of started and put up on Weebly or Free Spaces, and where I worry a little that we're at a place where there's just this idea that everything has to be turned into a product that can be monetized.
Yeah.
And I would compare this to like dictionary.com or thesaurus.com. I mean, I have a hard time seeing this as, I have a hard time imagining that it's smart to encourage someone to take this particular product and say this should be turned into something financial because of the hundreds to thousands of other projects that have been done for free that just sort of exist as part of a benefit to the general education ecosystem and probably don't have a lot of monetizing potential.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that this is a real challenge too around the sort of blossoming education startup ecosystem. And I should say that No Red Ink is part of Imagine K-12, which is an education startup incubator in Palo Alto. So it's certainly part of this new growing, or sort of, I don't know if ecosystem is quite the right word, but this new drive towards things becoming products, towards things becoming services, towards thinking about how can we build a stronger education startup set of tools. But I don't know how well something like this fits into the Silicon Valley model. And it's not just, I don't just say that about No Red Ink. I think that about a lot of education technology startups. Things that are going to actually have great impact in the classroom, really do important things that fill important gaps that are missing for students. Are those necessarily the things that are going to make investors billions of dollars, which is really something that, of course, at the end of the day is the bottom line in the startup community.
So as a part of the story, you talk about the Common Core state standards.
Yeah.
And their potential impact on the education industry, but some of the things you think may be missing from that. Well,
and this is this other interesting piece too. There's been a lot of talk recently that the Common Core, this new set of curriculum standards that have been adopted by a lot of states, not by all of them, but have been adopted by a lot of states. There's going to be a real boom for the education industry. Some make sort of a cynical point that in some cases, textbook publishers are really going to just be sort of rewording certain passages to make them look like they're complying with Common Core, and then sort of expecting districts to pay for new compliant textbooks and software and the like. But and no doubt we are seeing a lot of sort of interest go into making products for the Common Core. But I think that there are still plenty of gaps, plenty of things that the Common Core doesn't cover. Grammar is actually one of them. And I think that there are lots of opportunities still for people to do interesting things, to build interesting companies that aren't necessarily addressing this demand that supposedly the Common Core is going to start.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, but how do things change when the focus is on products that meet a specific set of mandated standards?
Right.
And it's not that students sort of actively look to game the system, but you do what you need to do in order to get success.
Right.
So the students are going to pick up on what's important and what's expected and how to match that. And if it's based, maybe this is too broad, but if it's based on products that have been created to match up with the Common Core state standards, will we have disincentivized the actual wide reading that you would do that actually makes you a better writer?
Well, I think that's really interesting too. And I say this as someone who, I taught writing for a number of years, although, at the college level, thinking about the kind of writing that students do already, the kind of writing that helps them understand their own voice, that helps them become confident in self-expression. And I don't just mean essay writing, but confident in self-expression in the variety of ways in which, as adults, we're expected to be able to do so. Are some of those things being taken out of the Common Core with focus? The Common Core in literacy in particular is going to be focusing more on nonfiction as opposed to personal expression. And so how are these sort of subtle not so subtle changes in the Common Core going to change the way we have students think about writing, think about their own voice, and think about the stake that they have in making sure that they can communicate well. And I mean, all of these standards are really untested, mandated but untested. So it's not really clear whether or not these are going to, the demand for, or sort of the implementation of the Common Core is really going to change, move the needle in the way that some proponents say it will. We don't know what the impact will be.
I have good friends that I really respect who sit at completely opposite ends of the spectrum on the Common Core. Some who love it and some who think it's the worst thing possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, I have sort of mixed feelings about the Common Core as well. I think that it's, I mean, but like, as I just said, I mean, I think it's hard to know, seeing things on paper, seeing a set of standards laid out on paper doesn't really give you a lot to go by when you actually see, when the rubber hits the road, how this is going to change, how this will change instruction, how it's going to change assessment, and most importantly, how this is going to actually impact learning.
It doesn't feel to me like it's changing the narrative around learning, and I guess that would be my biggest hesitation.
Right. Yeah, well, there is that, right?
So tell me what a mechanical MOOC is.
I'm pretty excited about this initiative. So this is, I mean, although certainly 2012 seems to be the year of the MOOC, and the year of what I think Stephen Downes actually sort of delineated this difference between the CMOOC, right, the connectivist MOOC, and the XMOOC, which are the ones coming out of MIT X and Udacity and Coursera. The mechanical MOOC is a new beast altogether that is a partnership with a number of open education sites, including MIT OpenCourseWare, OpenStudy, Codecademy, and PDPU. And that what they're doing is they're trying to gather a bunch of open educational resources, and in some ways modeled on Stephen Downes' Grasshopper technology, find a way to sort of pull these resources together and then deliver them as email updates in people's inboxes. So rather than demand students go to a particular website, all of the learning, the lectures, the quizzes, the assessments, the community discussions all occur on a particular website, the mechanical MOOC wants to sort of recognize that learning happens in open content all over the web, and find a way to sort of connect learners to the content and help them form their own communities to move through it. So I think it's a pretty interesting alternative to some of the Coursera and the Udacity-like MOOCs. It'll be interesting to watch. The first course starts mid-September.
How is it different than a good wiki on a topic?
I think the fact that it's a wiki still sort of does expect in a lot of cases people to go to the wiki to participate in the wiki. So for example, they're starting off with a class on Python, and the course materials come from MIT OpenCourseWare. They live on the MIT OpenCourseWare website. The study group will be part of OpenStudy, which is a massive open online study group. So discussions will happen there. Codecademy has built some web-based interactive tools. So for people who want to practice with practice their coding, they can go to Codecademy. And PDPU is sort of facilitating the email. So there really isn't an expectation that students go to one site, but they're trying to sort of give folks opportunities to tap into resources that are already in a number of places. But yet created in such a way that it is course-like, so that you actually feel like you're moving through the materials, not just as a self-paced learner, but with a cohort of learners as well.
So that was the piece I didn't really fully get, which was the community or constructivist piece. Is it just that they don't have a lot of detail yet, or did I miss it?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I mean, until this actually gets started, I'm really curious to see how this will happen as well. From the way it was explained to me, that there is an email newsletter that you'll get. You'll get the once a week email newsletter with the week's reading assignment, the week's coding assignment. You'll have and be directed to the open study to communicate with your peers that are moving through the content as well. But the way that they explain it as well is that if you fall behind, which happens really easily, that you'll still be able to sort of put the weekly newsletter on pause, resubscribe, and still participate with a cohort who are at the same place as you, which is, I think, is a nice twist to it, that even if you fall behind, it's not as though the rest of the class moves on without you, that you'll still have a community you'll still be able to participate with a community of folks who are moving at the same pace that you are through the material.
Good. Well, it'll be fun to watch. So you've kicked off your State of OER work with a post on problems of categorizing OER.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I mean, there is certainly no shortage, on one hand, of open educational resources online, but I think it's pretty easy to see where the stumbling blocks are for teachers, for faculty who want to adopt open educational resources in their own classrooms. I mean, it's hard, it's really overwhelming to find material. It actually takes quite a bit of hunting to be able to find the tools that you want to do. It's certainly the proprietary textbook publishers certainly make it a lot easier to go find a textbook, choose a textbook for your class. Then OER is still sort of challenging to do so. So I've started to sort of look through some of the portals, some of the places that have good directories of open content, but there's still, I think, a lot of obstacles for folks to be able to find the right content that they're looking for, and let alone the next step, which was one of the things that I'm quite interested in thinking about, remixing content. It's still actually a struggle to find the right kind of content, for your level, in your subject area, in the format that you're looking for, and still lots of questions and continuing confusion over exactly how the licensing works.
So you and I went to this Open Education Summit this year and left feeling as though it was fuzzy, right? The variety of groups there, and also when we even started a project based on this, which was to try and identify the different reasons for value and openness, right? That even that was not sort of clearly identified. Is this just a fuzzy area?
I think in some ways it is, and that's one of my plans for this week is to start surveying instructors and asking them some of their questions about this very thing. Why do you use open content? Why or why not? How do you use it? Do you remix it? But this question of definition, I think, is really an important one, and I find it. And although it may be fuzzy, particularly when we talk about the difference between open source and OER, for example, but I think it's important for us to nail it down. And I think sometimes the MOOCs are a good example of why this is the case. So, the acronym for Massive Open Online Course. But what that open means in MOOC is really, I think, not clear. It means open enrollment, certainly, that anyone can sign up for these classes, and that the content is free, but in some cases the certification, some of these charge money for certification now, so that's not free. And the money in most of the cases, particularly with the latest batch that have spun out of Stanford, and even the MIT one, the materials aren't openly licensed. The platform isn't open source. The platform is actually a walled garden. It's not on the open web in the way in which some things are. And so this question of how do we define open and who's using the adjective and how, I think, is really, really important for us to have some clarity. I mean, I don't think we need to sort of have dictates on who can and can't use the word open, but I do think we should have some clarity and ask some questions, particularly when we see publishers like Pearson, for example, say that they have open educational content. They have open content, and ask some questions about exactly what does that mean.
So you went through OER comments and kind of pulled some numbers just to get some sense of what was going on. And surprising to me were the number of openly licensed content pieces that were in PDF form.
Yeah, I mean, the PDF is really something that I tend to rail against, partially because the PDF is actually not open format. This is a proprietary format owned by Adobe, and of course, I think PDF has seen adoption for a number of reasons. Partially because it was a good format to save files in, to transfer. To transfer content from different kinds of computers, so to transfer from a Windows machine to a Mac, or to transfer content for people who are using Word to people who are using WordPerfect back in the day. But the PDF is actually not an open format, and it's actually a really difficult format to pull content back out of. You can save something in a PDF. It freezes it as though it would appear on the printed page. But then if you hand a PDF to somebody, it's very difficult to reverse engineer and actually pull the data back out. Whether it's in, sometimes if it's in multiple columns, or if you have tables or different formatting, a PDF is actually incredibly frustrating to work with. And so I'm really interested in finding, this is one of the reasons why I was so interested in this project, to sort of, because if we're publishing OER in PDF, then we're actually making it very difficult for people to remix it. And sure enough, it turns out that a lot of the OER out there is indeed in PDF format.
You also point out a couple of other things. The topics skew towards STEM. There's a lack of primary level materials, and it's a lot of test prep content.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, it's really interesting to see, to have a sort of to look at the lay of the land and to think about what are the motivations for putting content out there. And I was actually really surprised to see the amount of test prep content. I mean, there was a lot of test prep material. And then thinking about back at that Open Education Summit that we were at, David Wiley expressed some concern that we weren't seeing enough openly licensed assessments being created. And I thought it was very interesting to see that the assessments that I could find, at least in this case, all seem to be test prep associated with AP courses. And so, again, thinking about although we have there's a ton of OER material available, is it the material that we need? Is it the material that we want? Certainly not. Certainly some major gaps in different topics, and particularly in the lower grade levels.
Fascinating. Does it help to identify the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment? And is part of the difficulty, whether or not you're in the open world or not, that we really focus on the summative and not the formative? I think
that's a great observation, and I think that's probably part of these these larger trends that we're seeing in education in general as well. But thinking about all along the way how the pieces that and thinking too about if we're trying to create alternatives, right? Is it simply that open education resources are the alternative to proprietary textbooks? If that's the case, then I think that that's a huge failure of imagination. And I don't think that changing the license is necessarily a sufficient transformation. And so I think that it's important to think about. We can't just have openly licensed, summative assessments and think that we've sort of done good by making a difference here. I do think that we need to rethink assessments across the board. But I think that the opportunity when you have things openly licensed, I think, is that you can put things in the hands, things in the hands of teachers in different ways, and of course, also put things in the hands of learners in different ways as well. So
we can move on to the news. California State University system, the largest public university system in the U.S. that you described, is outsourcing its online education offerings to Pearson. You used the word ugh. I don't think that's any huge surprise.
Yeah, I think that this is actually pretty shocking news. Of course, the California in general, but the California State higher ed system is in a world of financial hurt. And I think we're hearing some arguments that by outsourcing this, that there will be cost savings, that things will be more efficient, that things will be standardized across the state. But I really find this to be incredibly depressing news, hopefully not setting a precedent for other states that are also experiencing fiscal difficulties. And I have a lot of questions too about what does this mean to outsource to a private, to a for-profit company, the public higher ed system. Who owns the content? How will this change the universities and the individual universities' intellectual property, professors' intellectual property? What happens to students' data? What happens to students' control of their own intellectual property? What happens to, as I said, what happens to the local institutional expertise that schools already have in place when it comes to online learning? California already has online education. This isn't something that Pearson has to step in and help provide. It already exists at many of these universities. Many of these universities have been groundbreakers in terms of the practices that we're seeing now, in terms of videotaping lecture, in terms of thinking about online and blended learning, instructional design. And so I think it's actually a really very chilling move on the part of the system to be handing over such a valuable public resource to Pearson.
Feels as though this is an economic decision. Part of the intriguing aspect of this is, along with sort of the jump to MOOCs and then the outsourcing of online education, it's almost as though these universities are ceding their very tangible benefits and values and are actually so diluting the value that exists within the institutions that, again, it's part of this larger story of shifting ground where schools that really can magnify learning methodologies based on the technologies are likely to produce better outcomes than these schools that have been such a large part of education.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I think that that's absolutely right. And I think that this, that it's also being framed in terms of standardization, and that somehow we're going to have more efficiencies through more standardization. In some ways runs counter to one of the reasons why we do have a variety of different institutions offering a variety of different subjects taught in a variety of different ways by a variety of different professors. That there are opportunities to study, whether you're studying sort of in Southern California and Northern California, whether you're at a school surrounded by redwoods or a school surrounded by the beach. That there's so many great things about the diversity of opportunities and the diversity of learning experiences that you can have just within the California state system, that to standardize that experience runs, I think it feels to me, runs counter to just one of the great things about having such a wide, such a diverse set of options for students to choose from.
So your Hacking Schooling book is up.
Yes, we've got the first draft of our collection of Hacking Schooling. We used something called read lists, which allowed us to sort of package everyone who submitted something that was in a blog or website format, package it in such a way that you can download a little reading bundle onto your Kindle or onto your website. So just in time for Professor Becker to submit his tenure review process, which I believe is ongoing at the moment.
I think the technology uses readability, which is actually one of my favorite apps.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's via readability, right?
Okay, so Skilled Up has opened its doors.
So Skilled Up is a new startup that just actually I'm not sure if it's still in beta, but it's just opened a directory. I'm trying to collect together some of the tens of thousands of online courses and learning materials that are on the web. Their hope is to make it easier for people to find what they're looking for. I mean, it's a bit like the research that I was doing for OER. Even if you're looking for something as simple like a course on how to learn Photoshop or a course on advanced web page design, it's still really difficult to find and then compare some of the opportunities. Are you looking for online courses, offline courses, self-paced? Do you want an instructor? How long does the course last? How much will it cost you? What do other learners think about it? And so Skilled Up wants to, I think in some ways they're aiming more at the workplace learning and then I would classes and courses around sorts of things a bit like Photoshop. But it's definitely a recognition that people do need some assistance in finding good material and finding the right courses that they want.
We've talked about them, and I still think this is going to be brilliant if we can get student ratings of the courses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Schoology, yet another company launching an app center, seeing the product as platform. So are these companies succeeding?
Yeah, I think Schoology is doing very well. I would say that they've been very quiet, not really sort of touting what they've been doing in the media as some startups have. They've been around for a number of years. A learning management system aimed at the K-12 level, New York-based. Their interface looks, I would say, a lot much like Edmodo, sort of Facebook-like. But yeah, I think that Schoology's been doing very well, and so they finally announced they opened up their API this summer at ISFI, I believe, and they announced finally now that they've got a bunch of apps that have integrated into the platform, which makes it easier if you're using Schoology. You have things like a single sign-on to use some of these other apps. That things are fully integrated into their platform.
It feels like this product, this platform, this idea of apps within the platform is sort of seen as the holy grail for a lot of these companies, and maybe it has to do with revenue. Do you think that piece of it is smart?
Yeah. I think that I do think that it is the holy grail. I think right now to be a platform is something that a lot of these companies are aiming for, and I think that in some ways they're wanting to replicate the success of Apple, certainly, to have on the revenue piece. If you can get if your store does well and you can get a small cut of every app sale, then that is a great revenue stream. I think it's also about data, right? If you have a platform, even if you're having a lot of folks integrated with your platform, you have a lot of data. You are able to see what your students are doing on your own tool, but you can also sort of get a sense of what's happening with some of these other apps. And I think that it's also people trying to follow in the Facebook model, and sort of how can you become a destination, and how can you get people to do all of their business, the business in Facebook's case, it's sort of the business of social networking. But how can you get people to do all their business on your website so that you control the data, you control the money, you control the traffic? I didn't frame that in a way that sounds very positive for education, so take that for what it's worth. I think it's worth asking that.
I guess the first thing I think of is how difficult it is to program for Android because of the variety of operating system versions, and how hard it will be for companies to produce an app for each of these different systems.
They just integrate with the API. So again, this is the great thing about APIs is it's really just a matter of connecting your API, in this case to the Schoology API. So you don't necessarily have to redesign anything. You just have to be able to have your app talk to their app. And in this case, it's web-based.
So that sounds much more reasonable. Probably my favorite story of the week, maybe the month, possibly the year, is this Chronicle of Higher Ed story on student comprehension was higher when students weren't being graded for participating in online discussions.
I thought this was really an interesting story. And actually, kudos to Piazza, which is an online study group startup. I think good for them for releasing this study to the Chronicle. Because I think that this is, they've made some really interesting observations, of course, based on student and professor interaction on their site. But this is important stuff that I'm glad to see that they're releasing to the public and not just sort of holding on to that those insights themselves. But this is, again, they've observed over the course of a couple terms the ways in which students interact with one another and the way in which professors and students interact on this online discussion forum, and some really interesting things in terms of when students opt to use anonymity or not, how students are when you force students to engage by sort of making their grade depend on it, that they will post more frequently on websites, but they tend to do so in ways that aren't particularly useful or aren't particularly meaningful. And when you sort of let the community and let social learning grow organically, that's really when students benefit the most, which I thought was really good to remember.
This is part of an ongoing sort of larger discussion as part of Connected Educator Month, because there's been a real push to provide incentives or recognition or badges for participation in these grassroots online communities of peer practice that seems to address this very same issue, which is, do you get more people by making it a part of a requirement or giving them some benefit or credits from it? The counter argument being it dilutes the very value of that kind of online community. Right.
You can definitely see, you can see the way in which when people are sort of, it's like when people are authentically engaged and are responding because they care, they're responding because they want to, as opposed to feeling like they must participate because they're compelled to. It's not surprising that the quality of the comments, the strength of the community even changes.
Okay, so news from Education Week about cheating in Philadelphia school districts possibly being even more widespread than was thought so far.
Yeah. So we continue to hear these stories from a number of districts across the country about suspected cheating in a high-stakes testing environment. Education Week looks a little bit more closely at some of the allegations that are ongoing in the Philly school district. Education Week suggests that things are even worse that the erasures were even more widespread than the school system has acknowledged, but the school system seems to be very slow in investigating the schools, even the schools that had strong evidence that cheating was happening. The district seems to be moving very slowly to investigating any of that more closely.
It doesn't seem like a great surprise, right? I mean, high stakes pressure, high stakes testing, pressure to perform well. The incentive to self-police there is going to be low.
Right, and I think that's, this isn't surprising at all. When what seems to matter is really just the scores on the test, and not actually sort of, again, this what we were just talking about, sort of forcing engagement, authentic, sort of the authenticity versus forced engagement, the difference between authentic assessment and this sort of high-stakes testing environment that we now have. It's really not surprising to see the responses. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's not surprising to see the responses from schools that feel compelled to cheat.
I hate ending on this note. Do we have any bright news that could close us out?
Well, here's some bright news, actually. I thought that the Gallup poll, every year the Gallup poll releases their assessments of the American public's thoughts on the education system. And I thought it was really interesting to see that in the past, when people have asked what the biggest problems in schools were, they've said things like crime or drugs, violence, and it was actually really clear. 97% of people said, the overwhelming response was the biggest problem is lack of funding, and that's not good news. But 97% of people said that it was important to improve the quality of the nation's urban schools, and 2/3 said that they'd be willing to pay more taxes to help improve urban schools. And I thought that was an interesting recognition that people really do see that the problem with schools isn't simply that you hear this narrative that the system is broken. People are recognizing that schools' budgets have been absolutely decimated, and that people are saying, at least to a survey, it might be different once it's a matter of voting for, voting on the ballot. But people are indicated they are interested in paying more taxes in order to support schools, and I think that that's important before we sort of rush to privatize and rush to sort of offload our civic responsibilities. That I think people are willing, hopefully, are willing to sort of step up and participate and make the community better for the sake of the community.
That is better news. And you and I sit in this very funny space, right? Which is, yes, we would like to see more public support for schools, but if it ends up being support for the same kind of high-stakes testing environment, I'm not sure we would be happy.
Right, I know. I mean, it's very hard to, and I think I'm very resistant to sort of embracing that narrative of the system is broken, partially because I feel as though there are people who tout that have a fix that I don't agree with, and so I think it is difficult to be able to say, to recognize that there are things that are broken. There are things that are definitely very, very wrong with the school system, and certainly the high-stakes testing and the sort of mad obsession with standardized tests is definitely part of that. But there are other pieces as well. But I think it is hard to sort of make be able to make a critique of the system as it currently exists without sort of wanting to see a public education system utterly dismantled and sold off to the highest bidder, which is what I fear, certainly in the case of the California higher ed system, is what we might be seeing happening.
Words of wisdom from Audrey Waters. Thanks, Audrey. Love spending this time with you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Me too. Bye.